So welcome to lesson 1 of the masterclass. Now in the last one, we finished on asking you guys why exactly it's so hard for African players to make it. But before we start the lesson, we want you guys to share what do you believe is the reason why Africans don't make it at the highest level. Take some time and just write down 3 different reasons why you believe Africans have a hard time making it at the professional level around the world. Now, you probably said things like lack of infrastructure, lack of opportunity, and you're probably right. But for this lesson, we want to focus on the things that are personally within your control, not the things that are outside of your control. What are the things that you don't know that may be preventing you from getting to the place that you want to get to? What makes it so hard for Africans to play at the highest level? One of the biggest things it's difficult for African players to understand, or maybe they've never really looked into, is why exactly it becomes very difficult for them to play at the highest level. And what are the statistics actually saying about the number of players from Africa that play in places like Europe or around the world? Like we said in the last lesson, there are about 1.2 billion Africans in the world, and about 2,000 of them actually play abroad. About 500 to 600 actually play in Europe. Now, if you consider that, that means that even where you're playing right now, the statistic of you actually making it, or the possibility of you actually making it at that highest level, is actually very low. But now let's look at why. Because we don't say this to discourage you, but rather to show you exactly how you can go about making that statistic go higher, or making the possibility of you playing at that level much greater. One of the first rules that I think every player must understand, especially when it comes to a place like Africa, is that if you're under the age of 18, you actually can't move internationally according to FIFA rules. Now, that changes quite a few things for African players. One of the things it changed for me is I realized that all these foreign trips that academies maybe take players from anywhere in Africa, and you go to a place like Sweden or the UK, and at that point, you as a young player truly believe that this is your big chance. You know, you're maybe 14, 15, 16 years of age, and you believe that maybe, you know, managers will be on the sideline and you really impress them and maybe they'll sign you. But the truth is you can't actually move internationally under the age of 18. Now, FIFA did this to stop player trafficking around the world in about 2009. But it's one of the reasons why it's so difficult, especially for international players under the age of 18, to actually go abroad and play. Now, some clubs actually try to go around this. And there are ways that maybe are gray areas that clubs try to go around this rule. But the truth is, many of us are not playing at a level where a club would actually consider bending the rules just to have you play for them. And so we want to look at what are some of the rules that are preventing you from getting to where you want to play. And that's one of them. The other rules when it comes to limitations of African players playing abroad is the limit on international players playing in different teams. Most players don't understand this or have never understood this. But even in Kenya alone, each team is only allowed 5 foreign players. If we talk about a country like Italy, same thing. Only 5 non-European Union players can play for one team at any one time. In Spain, that number is 3. And somewhere like the UK, it is a little bit different. But these are certain things that make it very difficult for African players to make it at that level, simply because the number of sports that we are actually able to access are less than players coming from other countries within the European Union. And when we talk about Europe, that is one of the biggest limitations. When you talk about other countries like the US, for example, they only allow 8 players to play at the professional level per team that are international players. Why do they do this? You could probably say that they're trying to protect their own players and make it so that clubs actually invest in their own players within their own country. But this is one of the biggest limitations for African players that African players really need to understand. We'll attach different links that will allow you to understand exactly how this all works for the different countries. Let's look at some practical examples. When we look at a player like Felipe Coutinho, who once played for Liverpool and had to move to Barcelona. At the time he moved to Barcelona, Barcelona had already reached their quota of 3 non-EU players playing for their team at that time. Now, of course, Felipe Coutinho was from Brazil, but through his ancestry, he was allowed to claim Portuguese citizenship that would allow him to move within the EU. These are some of the ways that players are forced to go around the world, or clubs are forced to go around the world. In the English Premier League, they don't have limits on international players. Instead, they have certain standards that that player must be at for them to gain a work permit to play in the UK. Some of these standards, which we will attach a link below where you can see all of them, is a point system. And dependent on that player's level, they get certain points. So one of the things that it states is that you must have played for your national team either at youth level or senior team level. And most players, if you're watching this, maybe you're not playing at that level. And that makes it difficult for you to access opportunities in a place like the UK. Other rules include that the club that you're coming from must have played in the Champions League or the Europa League, and you get certain points for that. Now you can read all about these different things in the links that we'll attach, but these are some of the things that make it particularly difficult to play in the UK as opposed to other countries. When it comes to football and playing in places like Europe, I would say that most players have to stop thinking of it as you go from one day playing in Nairobi to suddenly playing, in a place like Europe. Life in general and football especially doesn't work like that. You don't go from high school to suddenly getting your dream job, but you can go to certain places that will allow you to climb one step up on the ladder and continue to grow in your career and reach a place like Europe eventually. And that's what we want to show you. Now, in this lesson, what we've covered may sound a little bit difficult to process, and that's why we'll attach links that you guys can look at and understand exactly how everything works and how, if I want to play in France, what do I need to know about the limitations of foreign players and all of these different things. But what we wanted to show you is why it is so difficult for many Africans to play at that level, at the highest level in places like Europe. Now, in saying all of that, there are certain countries that are less strict when it comes to rules of foreign players playing in their leagues. Countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland. These are places where you may actually know some African players that have gone there. And some clubs that actually are looking for African players send players there for a period of time for them to be naturalized, and then they come back. This is also an option if you're looking at professional opportunities alone. But remember, football is vast and wide. There's many places in the world that you can play. And you may not go from where you are now to playing for your dream club, but there is a way that you can go around it. And that's what we want to cover in the next lesson. But the place that we must start is assessing your level. Where are you now? And what opportunities do you have access to where you are now?